Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi nahmaduhu wa nasta'inuhu wa nastaghfiruhu wa nu'minu bihi wa natawakkalu alayh wa na'udhu billahi min shururi anfusina wa min sayyiati a'malina. Assalamu alaikum. I want to first apologize for the lateness of our arrival, and it's rather ironic that in part of our discussion last night, we were talking about how important it was for Muslims to break this bad trend that we've established in many places, at least we do in the United States, and that's arriving very late for events. And I have to say, and I hope that you got the message, because we really feel bad about coming at this time, that the traffic was backed up beyond anything that our brothers could anticipate. So don't put it on me. I'm just a passenger in the car. I get there when they bring me and take me from place to place. Brothers and sisters, first I'd like to thank likeMEDIA and Brother Rehan Iqbal for affording me the opportunity to come and to share some ideas with you this evening about standing for justice and the importance of justice, not just to those who are on the forefront of different organizations or masajid, but the responsibility that each and every one of us would have a divine command, a divine imperative from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And I also would like to thank the Muslims, you all of Manchester here. I can now go back to the southern part of the United States and talk about this fabulous structure that we're in right now. I don't know, I can't think right off of any place that has the potential to contain so much in one building as you have here. I don't think I've experienced that in the States. Now, so that you all will not get too upset by our being so late, I will try to give a more abbreviated version. I'll give what I came to give, but I'll do a shortened version of it because we're already 30 minutes late and I don't want to tire you out. Brothers and sisters, to many believers around the world, there is no more important imperative for each and every one of us than justice and standing for justice. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala throughout the Qur'an makes it very clear that He will declare war on those who, from any point of zulm, anything, any act of oppression, any act of depriving someone else, depriving a family member, or doing anything that would involve injustice, this being an oppressor. And so I want to just talk for a few minutes about standing for justice. And as I said, we'll try to shorten a little bit what I had intended to discuss. When we look at in contemporary society and look at the time of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, justice is the only element, it is the only human right that is limitless. Justice does not involve one loving someone in order to be just to that person. It has nothing to do with one's attraction to an individual or a group of people. According to this high standard of justice established by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it's that human right that every one of us as Khalifa fil Ard, that this right is due us. Let me give you a quick example. You have a human right like freedom, but freedom can have its limitations. In the United States, I don't know how it is here in the UK, but in the United States, although we say that we have unlimited freedom, except for breaking different kinds of laws, my freedom of expression, which is the First Amendment right in our Constitution, my freedom to gather, to express, to say whatever I want, can be grossly inhibited. And one or two quick examples. I or no one else can go in a crowded theater or cinema and exercise my freedom of expression by screaming out fire. This is against the law. You would probably go to jail because of the panic and the turmoil that you would create. There's so many other examples of different human rights that all of us are guaranteed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that we should have, just from being a human being. But there are limits to these rights, but there's no limit to this right of justice, this human right of justice. It's unlimited. It has no qualifications in order for us to be just in our society. At the time of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, we know that it was a tribal society. It was strictly tribalistic in the manner in which they dispense with their justice. It was the kind of society that there was this mantra amongst the tribes that help your brother whether he is right or wrong. That if your tribal member had committed a wrong against a member of another tribe, it is your responsibility, just because, in this attitude, just because you're from the same tribe, that the sense of asabiya was so strong in that Meccan society that the idea was a tribal member commit a wrong, but you still have to support this person. The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, as we find from the Sirah and Hadith literature, did not change this concept. He only used what was so current amongst the people, but elevated this concept of helping your brother whether right or wrong by declaring that how you help your brother, and he actually repeated, help your brother whether he's the oppressor or the oppressed. And we find that Sahaba were sitting around and they were trying to understand, we understand helping our brother when he's oppressed, but how can we help the oppressor? This sounds too much like Jahiliyyah. Of course, they wouldn't say this to the Messenger of Allah. It sounds like Jahiliyyah. It sounds like the same thing that was practiced before Islam. And of course, you know the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ's response. It was that you help your brother when he's an oppressor by stopping he or she from committing the oppression. If your brother is oppressed, then it's your duty and responsibility to help that brother. But the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ elevated this concept of helping your brother or your sister, whether they are oppressed or the oppressor, by stating and giving us this command that we have a responsibility, that the divine sense of justice that has been imposed upon us as human beings is such that we must stop dhulm, we must stop oppression wherever we see it. Whether this oppression is against our own selves, whether the oppression is against your parents, whether your parents are oppressors or they're being oppressed, whether your other relatives are oppressors or being oppressed, whether a person is rich or poor, that it makes no difference. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had established clearly that this oppression is something that has to be done away with. Brothers and sisters, the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in a hadith that's contained in the Sahih of Bukhari, also mentioned that for us it's a warning to instill a sense of chill in us as believers, that we should be afraid of the curse of the dua of the person who is oppressed. And the Prophet ﷺ went on to say that the oppressed, that there's no screen, there's no barrier between the person being oppressed and their dua and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So Allah, through the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, is making it clear that Allah is on the side of the oppressed. And that dua that is made from someone whose rights are being deprived, whose land is being taken, whose minerals, whose resources are taken, who they can't feed their family because of some kind of institutionalized system of oppression or racism, that be careful in how you treat that person, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will hear this dua without any barrier or screen coming between that dua and the person who is being oppressed. I want to give just a few more examples, and then I'll try to lock in on our responsibility today. We all, I'm sure, are familiar with Imam Ahmed ibn Hanbal. And there were many challenges during the time of Imam Ahmed. And Imam Ahmed was one who was not a scholar for hire, that no caliph could pay him enough to go against what he knew to be correct or felt and believed to be correct about this deen. And as a result of his insistence on holding on to what he knew to be the truth, Imam Ahmed suffered imprisonment for many years. Imam Ahmed was tortured even while he was in prison. And one of the challenges, the greatest challenges of Imam Ahmed's times, was a group called the Mu'tazilites. That these were people who had come up with this false notion that the Kitabullah, that the Qur'an of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was something that was created. They were saying that just like the heavens and the earth, the Qur'an one day will just disappear. It's a created thing. And Imam Ahmed and just a few other scholars, and it came to a point that Imam Ahmed was standing alone in his opposition even to the Caliph Mansur on this particular point. And he was saying, no, it's the Kalamullah. No, don't say that this is created. This is a wrong thing for you to say, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has said it's the word of Allah. Now, how are you coming with something else? In one of his imprisonments, Imam Ahmed had a prison guard to come to him and ask him whether or not a particular hadith Qudsi, whether it was authentic or not. And the hadith was that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was saying that I shall take revenge on the oppressor in this world and in the next. That I shall take revenge on someone who saw the person being oppressed and was able to help him, but did not. And so this prison guard, being a believer, being a Muslim, asked Imam Ahmed, is this an authentic hadith? I've heard you reciting, and I've heard other hadith about how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's curse is on the person who even assists an oppressor. So this particular guard came to Imam Ahmed and said, are these hadith authentic? And Imam Ahmed was recorded to have said, yes. He told this guard, yes, these are authentic. And then the guard asked him, well, does it make me in the category, does it put me in the category where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, as the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam has said that he said, that I am assisting an oppressor? Imam Ahmed told this brother, no, you're not assisting an oppressor, you are the oppressor. The assistant in this category is the person that helps you comb your hair. If someone is bringing you food, whether it's your wife or anyone else, that's the person who's assisting an oppressor. You are an oppressor. So be clear that even though you are working hand in hand with someone who is creating oppression on the people, oppression on individuals, you are in the same category in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as the person who's giving the orders. And it's not difficult for us to look around in the contemporary society today and just imagine. I'm not trying to call anyone oppressors or anything like that. So I'll let you think about that. I'll let you decide in this divine equation as to who is an assistant in oppressing people and who is actually an oppressor. Brothers and sisters, Let me just share just a couple of other quick stories, and as I said, I'll try to jump into more contemporary times. But all of us are familiar with the keen sense of justice of the second caliph of the Muslims, Umar ibn al-Khattab, radiyallahu anhu. And we know that Umar as a caliph, and first we know that there were many Sahaba who were very afraid that Umar would come to authority over them. They were so afraid that they would talk, even during the lifetime of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, please, Umar is so harsh. I think we should never have someone like Umar in charge of our affairs. But we know that one of the practices of Umar ibn al-Khattab, radiyallahu anhu, when he became the caliph, was that he had an extremely keen sense of justice. And one of his practices was that every night, and let me inject this as well, that Umar, according to the Sirah literature, Umar was a person who slept very little at night. It was even said about Umar ibn al-Khattab that there were very few occasions in which he even laid down on a bed. That he would go to Hajj, he would go all day, he would be doing the affairs of the believers in the day, he's praying at night. And they said that he would just sit down and lean up against a wall just for a few minutes and take what we call in the States a power nap. And he would take his power nap and then get up and continue to serve the Ummah of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. On this particular occasion, Umar and his servant Aslam, who used to accompany him as he went around Medina and its suburbs, that Umar ibn al-Khattab saw a campfire outside of Medina. And Umar said, well, perhaps it's a caravan. And so Aslam, let's walk, and it was far out into the desert. He said, but let's walk out there and just see if the people from this caravan have some need that I can fulfill. And so when Umar approached, he saw that it was just a single lady. She had her tent, and there were young children around her. So when Umar asked permission to approach, she said, yes, you can approach. And she saw the woman with a pan, and she was sort of shaking the pan over this fire. And Umar looked at the children, and these young children were all just crying. They were just crying and crying. So Umar asked the lady, well, why are these kids crying? What's going on? And the lady told him, this Muslim sister told him, that they're crying because they're so hungry and I don't have anything for them to eat. And so Umar said, well, what do you have in the pan? You're cooking something over the fire. And the mother responded that there's nothing but water. I want to give them some sensation that they're taking something in to quell their hunger so that they could go to sleep. Maybe tomorrow, inshallah, will be a better day and I have something to feed them. And then the woman made a very curious remark. And she didn't curse Umar, but she said that Umar, he should know what my condition is, because she heard and knew about how he went to such great lengths to try to meet the needs of the believers. And she said that Umar is, I just don't know how I feel about him now. That Umar is someone that should know what my condition is and to help relieve my suffering. And this story goes on to say that Umar just said to the lady, well, how is he supposed to know about your condition? How is the caliph over the Muslims? How is he going to know about you out in the desert? It's one thing if you had come into Medina, but how is the caliph supposed to know? And the woman understood this high bar that had been set for justice and his responsibility over the believers. So she had questioned him about this and said that, yes, he's Amir Mu'minun. He should know the condition of his people. I'm one of the followers of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he should know my condition. Umar did not identify himself. He went back with Aslam, went back into Medina. The story is he went straight to the Baytul Mal, and he withdrew some funds from this Baytul Mal. And then Umar began to fill up a sack just full of dates and flour and all kinds of things that would feed this family for a considerable period of time. And then the emir of the believers took the sack and started to put it on his back. And Aslam said, "No, Amir, I'm here to carry that." And Umar asked Aslam, "Are you going to carry my deeds on Yom Kiyama? Are you going to count for me on Yom Kiyama?" No. Just like I have the responsibility of my deeds here, I have to bear that in Qiyamah. So no, you help put it on my back. They said it was a big, huge sack. Put it on my back and I'll carry it. So Umar went back to the mother and her children. And he took the pan and started putting dates and flour and some other ingredient in there to make a kind of porridge dish. And then he gave this mother all of these supplies that he had brought to her, feeling I know, if I don't know, I can't do anything about it. But in my position as the leader of this ummah, I should know. So I'm going to cook this stuff with my own hands. I'm going to carry it on my back. I'm going to give you as much as I could carry. And so the mother responded, she thanked who she didn't know was Umar. And she said, "You know what? You're a much better person than Umar. You deserve to be the caliph, not Umar." And Umar simply said to the woman that if you go visit the caliph, you're going to find me sitting there. I'm Umar. Brothers and sisters, this high standard, we're talking about someone who is responsible for the affairs of all of the Muslims at that time. But he felt this sense of justice to the extent that no one who was a believer was going to suffer, and the Muslims, starting with himself, could do something about the suffering. Otherwise, he becomes one of the oppressors if he were to ignore the legitimate needs of those who were under his authority. Let me share just one other point here. And it's not really one point. Let me just shift gears, is basically what I'm trying to say. I just have a few more things to comment on, and I'll be done. You know, traveling around in England the way that I have this week put me to mind of an individual that many of us in the United States care very much about as the part of this ummah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And I start thinking about this individual because I was aware that prior to his martyrdom, that Malcolm X, El-Hajj Malik Shabazz, was taken around England and UK by your organization here called FOSIS. Now, I'm not trying to compare likeMEDIA with FOSIS, and I'm definitely not trying to compare myself to Malcolm X. But being a son of the soil of the United States, I would have to reflect upon this great Shaheed coming and going across the UK in a very similar manner in which I've been blessed to be able to do during the course of this week. And there was something about this individual, El-Hajj Malik Shabazz, Malcolm X, that even when he was a member of an organization called the Nation of Islam, there was something very attractive about this person from anyone, particularly from the African American community, who had a genuine desire to try to cast off this system of institutional racism It started with chattel slavery that continued in a system of anti-black laws called, first after slavery immediately, called black codes. And then spanning out into every aspect of the society called Jim Crow laws. Now this is terminology, especially this Jim Crow, you may not be familiar with. But the Jim Crow laws were the laws that came into existence when the formal discriminatory laws against African Americans were cast aside in 1964 and in 1965, and 65 voting rights and 64 in public accommodations. And Malcolm X was someone that this tremendous struggle and movement of people to try to find and reach a state in the society, to work and to achieve a state in society in which there would be no institutional controls that would prohibit these people of African descent from having full run of the land, not trying to just take people's property by run of the land, but would not be identified as a detriment to the society, hence having all kinds of laws that would discriminate against them. And this civil rights movement, the modern day civil rights movement, started in the 1950s. And Malcolm X at the time was a member of an organization called the Nation of Islam. But the last 11 months of his life, and which was signaled by his making Hajj in April of 1964. But when Malcolm made Hajj, it wasn't like myself and my wife making Hajj for the first time. He didn't come directly back to the States. He went to most of the Muslim majority countries in the Middle East. After performing the Hajj, he met with so many scholars. He moved around just throughout the world, within the region of West Africa, East Africa, and Saudi Arabia. And then he came back to the States. And when Malcolm came back, he came back with different kind of pronouncements. He was saying now that he had embraced this global ummah, that it was no longer just about people like the Nation of Islam had proclaimed, that it was just about African American people, just about black people. He said, no, that's not Islam. This is not just to try to monopolize and characterize this divinely perfected religion for human beings as being just for one group of people. I'm no longer a part of that. And because of his influence, and I'm saying this within an 11-month period, because of this influence, many of us stopped talking about civil rights and struggling for laws that legislators would put into place, and a judiciary that would either say that this was constitutional or not, and elevate the struggle for anyone for justice and equality, to elevate this to a human rights struggle. You see, I grew up during this period. And until Al-Hajj Malik Shabazz, Malcolm X started talking about human rights as he understood it as guaranteed to all of us as just being Khalifatul Ard. We're put here for a purpose. We're put here to be the vicegerents of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on earth. And so you can't legislate. We shouldn't even think in terms of trying to legislate what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us as human beings at birth. And so one of his first major impacts was to begin to have the people who were so critical and instructive in their guidance in the civil rights movement to now start incorporating into their vocabulary this idea of human rights, something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had just ingrained throughout the Qur'an and the Sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But Al-Hajj Malik Shabazz did something else. And there were so many other influences, but I just want to mention just one. And that was that Al-Hajj Malik al-Shabazz, as a Muslim, set a standard by which the people in America in particular, and the Muslims and others on a global scale could look at someone who was living justly and not just talking about a nice sounding phrase or expression of justice. That Al-Hajj Malik Shabazz example was one that it is more important that we live justly than it is just to talk about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala being al-adl and all this emphasis on justice and I'm a just person and all of these kinds of things. But what his life story reveals is that in order to take that position and that stand, that it takes courage to live justly in the societies in which we live takes courage. It doesn't mean that, as the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ had said, that the greatest words that a human being can utter are the words that are uttered in the face of a tyrant, like Imam Ahmed ibn Hanbal, and so many through the centuries, like Al-Hajj Malik al-Shabazz, Malcolm X. Let me share one little aside. And I can't say that I did this particular action because I was thinking immediately of Al-Hajj Malik al-Shabazz, but his life story, particularly as a Muslim, influenced my trajectory in life. From a teenager, when I first read his autobiography, and I would encourage everyone in here, if you haven't read it, to read the autobiography of Malcolm X. If you haven't read anything else about America and American life, read this book. If you have not read it, please read it. But this is something that, this is honestly the first time that I've ever said this in public. Maybe I think that because I'm on the other side of the Atlantic, it's not going to follow me back home. It might even stop me at the customs when I'm trying to return back through Newark, New Jersey to try to get home. But I'll share this with you. A number of years ago, there was a president in the United States by the name of Jimmy Carter. And Jimmy Carter, I've come to really appreciate this individual. He was a one-term president. And the 1979 hostage-taking affair took place under his watch, where the U.S. Embassy in Tehran was overtaken by these students. And that was under President Jimmy Carter's watch. And as a student matriculating in Washington, D.C., I'm from North Carolina, I was in university in Washington, D.C., I participated in so many different protests, because D.C., everybody in and everybody would come and protest in Washington. And Jimmy Carter was the president, and while I was in college, I was involved with certain groups, and there's a park directly across from where the president and his family reside called the White House. And across from the White House, there's this Lafayette Park. And as a student, before becoming Muslim, I used to stand in that park and condemn whoever was in the White House because of their policies against the world. I was one of the people that was always up condemning, whether it was Richard Nixon, Gerald Ford, Jimmy Carter. It didn't matter to me. I didn't discriminate with my tongue against these people. I could find something that they needed to be criticized, but it was always around justice issues, issues of justice, whether in the United States, some U.S. policy, or U.S. policy somewhere else in the world. And so surprisingly, Jimmy Carter being one of the people that I had condemned from Lafayette Park, one day I received this about 7-page Western Union telegram. And the telegram was inviting me to go to this session about the Panama Canal. I think at this time the discussion was for the government trying to get community support to turn the Panama Canal back over to the government of Panama in 1999. And there was a lot of opposition to this at this time. And so I got this 6-7-page telegram, and it was inviting me to come to this session, this working session at this hotel. And then it was saying that you'll be bused for a reception at the White House with President Jimmy Carter. So I was so much not that. I wasn't that guy who received those kinds of invitations at that time. So I figured that a very good friend of mine that we'd done a lot of community work together had actually spent money to send this phony telegram to my house. And I said, surely my good friend Solly sent me this. Nowhere in the world. So it had a number on there. They said, well, you know, give us your social security number, call this number so that they can process you. So for some crazy reason on my part, I went on and went through the process. And not only did I go through the process, they said, well, be here at this time. And I showed up, I was there. And they said, okay, well, we'll check your ID and you go into this working session. And I went in the working session. And then they said, okay, well, we have designated buses based on whatever it was. And we want you to get on the buses and we're going to ship you over to the White House. So once we got there were 3 checkpoints to go into the White House, into the inner area of the White House. This was not the tourist area, it was another area of the White House. And at every station, I just knew that I was going to be told, what is the matter with you? You better get out of here before we lock you up. But each place I went to, I just went right through. And then we went into this big reception hall. And I'm going to make this short, and I'm going to something else. But I went into this big reception hall, and people were walking around, and they were drinking juice or tea or water or whatever. And there was a person from my hometown. He was much younger than me. And he was the Northwest Regional Director of the Democratic Party, And so when he saw me, I could see him standing over in the corner looking at me like, that can't be Griggs. There's nowhere in the world he's in this gathering. So he was so shocked, he came over and asked me, what are you doing here? I mean, he couldn't hold it. He just asked me, what are you doing here? I said, I don't know. So I'm still waiting for somebody to drag me out, as I say, because of my activism at that time. So finally, they say, go into this room, and President Carter will be in here very shortly. I go into the room, and I'm standing there, and now I'm having conscious problems. Now I'm beginning to feel... I'm sorry? I was just making sure. Oh, yes, thank you so much. Now I'm beginning to feel hypocritical. That I'm here smoozing with the President of the United States, that I've been standing across the street condemning him and his government policies. So as the president came into this big reception hall, he was going all the way around the room, shaking hands and introducing himself and thanking the people for coming at this time. So I'm standing there, and I'm just like, I just can't do this. I mean, I feel like a hypocrite. I really should not have come here. Why did I do this? It's just going through my head. I had all these conflicting feelings. So when he got to me, was at the person right beside me. And then he stepped over to me and he said, hi, I'm Jimmy Carter. And at that moment, I call it youthful folly now, but at that particular moment, as he extended his hand, I put my hands behind my back and just stepped back. And it was like mushrooms popping up with the Secret Service, surrounded him real quickly and just moved him down without creating a bigger incident than I had at that side of the room. But I look back on that and I say, well, you know, I think Jimmy Carter was one of the, in terms of his humanity, probably one of the better presidents the United States has had in the 20th century. But at that particular moment, I felt that I could not be a hypocrite to what I believed, that I disagreed with what he was doing in many areas, and now I'm there like all of these other people who were big supporters, unquestioning of anything he was doing. So I'm not saying that this is the most courageous act that I or anyone else could have done. But as a 25 or 26-year-old, for me, it was a big deal. It was my way, not even having, well, I was a Muslim at that time. I was definitely Muslim at that time. Knowing this hadith of speaking a word of truth to a tyrant. This was my silent gesture of speaking a word of truth to the, in my eyes at that time, to the tyrant. So what Malcolm X showed us in the States is that the price that some people are prepared to pay in order to establish a system of justice on this earth. How do I live justly? Let me give you an example. Folks don't have to be, he was a tremendous speaker. You don't have to be a speaker, a lecturer. You don't have to be the leader of an organization. You don't even have to be someone who has so many resources and you lend those resources to other people. Let's just look at some ways that if we can see any aspect of oppression in a system, that we won't perpetuate that system either through our silence or our support of systems that are oppressive. Now, I'm not sure, I probably should have looked it up. I don't know where, I don't know if you grow all your fruits and vegetables here on this island, which I doubt. It's a little cold here to be growing a lot of fruits and vegetables. But I tell you, in the United States, right, how we love eating all of these fruits and vegetables that are out of season. In the middle of the winter, we just love to have fresh bananas and oranges and all of these kinds of things that can't be grown at that time in 99% of the places in America. So what American fruit companies have done since about the 1920s, they have gone down into Central and South America and established themselves and almost literally just taken the fruit trees, banana trees, and all of these other things, pineapples and all these other things from Central and South America. In many of these countries, these fruit companies, and they're big, huge conglomerates. It's not like the fruit seller Stan, and he's just getting a few oranges to sell to people. That these companies literally in Central and South America oftentimes have larger military and paramilitary forces, better militarily equipped than the government themselves. And in many of these countries, they place the workers in confines as if they were prisoners and have them working under some horrendous conditions. And that's the price that we pay in the United States, to close our eyes. We don't want to care where it comes from. I just want my bananas in December. I don't care where you get it from. I don't care how you get it. You find the same kind of turn and look the other way attitude, even in the clothes that we wear. That we like our clothes to be nice. We want to look nice, and we should. But we can turn a blind eye to where are our clothes, where are our shoes coming from. You know, recently you had this clothing factory in Bangladesh that collapsed, and it killed a number of people. And it brought attention to the working conditions in Bangladesh in a lot of these factories that were owned by companies in the United States. Before, nobody cared. All they knew when they saw a tag saying Bangladesh, they saw a tag saying China, we see a tag saying somewhere in Eastern Europe, we didn't care about how these garments were made. We didn't care what Nike did, how they produced those shoes. We just wanted our Air Jordans. We didn't care about the conditions under which these things were built. But if we are trying to live justly, then we have to be concerned about those things that we are utilizing on a day-to-day basis, how things are coming into our spheres, and if it means I will try not to support this brand or this brand, unless and until they change their working conditions for the workers, unless and until these oppressive, I'll just take your resources actions are not stopped, then I'm not going to support it. These are kind of avenues that we have available to us, that you don't have to be a person who is going around talking about issues or organizing protests and boycotts, but we should be conscious of being an oppressor or assisting oppression. And the last thing I'll just mention is this whole idea about oppression starting within ourselves. Don't be oppressive to yourself. Don't do anything consciously that will jeopardize your relationship to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this world and in the next. That's the greatest oppression that you and I can commit. That's the greatest complicity with oppression that we can commit, is that we oppress our own souls, thereby having Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's promise of punishing those who are oppressors and assisting oppressors. Brothers and sisters, if we take the time to educate ourselves about what's going on around us, let me share with you from just my perspective, one of the major problems that we have found as part of the ummah of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam in the United States. I'm sure that you all heard of this event, and I'm closing on this, but I'm sure you all heard this event, which has been known now and stamped and imprinted in history as 9/11. Well, many of us who were Muslim and living in the States before 9/11 were a part of organizations, Muslim organizations, masajid, Islamic centers. The landscape of America has been almost flooded with the either minarets or the crescent on the top of the centers. I mean, there are very few places in America you can go right now, and there's not a considerable population of Muslims. But what a funny thing happened, a lot of things happened after 9/11. But because the Muslim community at that time had lived such an introverted lifestyle, that we were the people that we built beautiful centers. But the person who's living next door to the center the non-Muslims didn't have a clue what we were doing behind those walls. That we are a nation that had so many doctors that it's almost, if you dump Muslim doctors and scatter us around the country, healthcare would just transform the system of healthcare. If there was some system of free clinics and other things organized by more Muslims in the United States, it would significantly impact the unavailability of health services in the country. But before 9/11, because resources, now I'm not talking about me because I'm a broke guy, but the Muslim resources, access to money I'm talking about, that was not a problem necessarily in the United States. But we failed to look above the walls of our masjids and Islamic centers, and we failed to bring people in to demonstrate that Islam and the Muslims are for social justice. We are for helping to relieve the suffering of people and these kinds of things. So when 9/11 happened, this strange phenomena called Islamophobia began to catch wind. And what happened is that this paid industry, these people who are churning out this information, about a $50 million a year industry, just only purpose to exist is to mislead the American public about Islam. I've personally been victimized in my capacity as a chaplain at Wake Forest University in the city that I come from, I've been personally victimized by a graduate of the university who was attached to one of these Islamophobic groups called the Qari'ah Fund. And it included a former CIA director and all these other kinds of military types and this kind of thing. And they were using their access to intelligence information and other things to smear, to lie, to paint the image of individual Muslims and Muslims in something that everyone would want to run and turn away from. But I say that when I look back from that vantage point from 2001 until today, that our incapacity, our unwillingness, I put it that way, our unwillingness to engage the community around us set us up for people to come out and say, well, you know what they're doing behind those walls? They're in there sacrificing non-Muslim babies. Like was said during the Crusades, said that the Muslims, you have to hide your babies because the Muslims would cut the throat of the babies, your child, and drink your little daughter's blood. This kind of thing. And it sounds so outrageous when we reflect on that today. But there's a kind of a modern day crusader language that's going across the UK, and it's going across the States, and going across Europe and other places where Muslims are living as a minority population. And I submit to you that the majority of the people in this country, that the majority of the people in the United States are not just rotten and bad-hearted people who just naturally want to despise and hate Muslims and Islam. So one of the greatest opportunities that you and I have to break through this cycle of Islamophobia is to actually engage more. Engage around issues when we understand them and we have the opportunity around social justice. Social justice is an issue. And I'll close on this. Now, I generally say that 3 times. I've only said it twice. I have one more time to say this. Without any exaggeration, in the United States, a man who lived his life for 11 months on the Sirat al-Mustaqim, a man who was not a Muslim scholar of any kind, a man who before coming into true Islam, people were afraid of him because of some of the things that would come out of his mouth. And I'm referring back to Malcolm X. That this person, Allah used this one singular individual to bring millions of people like myself, to influence millions of brothers and sisters like myself to embrace Islam. There are very few people in the African American community in particular who are of a certain age, and even those who are much younger. If you ask them, what got you first interested in Islam? What influenced your becoming Muslim? They will say Malcolm X, just like I have to say it was Malcolm. The issue that Allah used to bring these millions of people into this deen, to influence Muslims all around the world. I've been blessed with having gone to over 30 countries. And this hadith where Allah will bring you together with like souls, that you could be in a big room and Allah will connect you. You don't need an introduction. Allah will connect you with a person with a similar soul, who has a similar desire to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and to do certain things. Well, Malcolm has brought together people. And I'm not trying to elevate his status beyond anything other than a Muslim. But I'm just trying to emphasize how Allah can use one individual in contemporary times, can use one individual to have such a tremendous influence. And the issue that Malcolm is most known for is the issue of social justice. Now just imagine if I go back to North Carolina and people start seeing me and my kufi on my head every time I walk out the door. Not the same kufi, I have a few, but having a kufi on my head every time I walk out my door. Imagine the people, like in North Carolina, across the United States. Pew Research and other research groups are saying that 26%, a quarter of the population of the people in the United States today, are turning away from organized religion. In the university where I work, a quarter, it matches the national average, a quarter of the incoming students. And many of them have come from wonderful Muslim homes. Like I have a student, now this is my third time, so this is the last time, I'm gonna end on this note. There's a student who is a sophomore now at the university where I work. His father, mother, grandfather, grandmother, older brothers, and all of them are very active in the mosque. And it breaks my heart. I remember when the kid was born. And it breaks my heart when I see the Muslim student organization and their programs on campus, and he's never there. It breaks my heart to see this young man who comes from such a solid Muslim background, to see him not even identify himself on the paperwork when he came into the university. So almost every Friday, his grandfather is asking me how, and I'm not going to call his name, but how is he doing? And I said, I haven't seen him as much as I like to. I'm going to send him an email and ask him to come and to talk to me, and I've done that. So it means now I'm going to have to find out what dorm he's in. We call them dorms. Rehan told me, here you don't call them dorms, where the students live when they're on campus anyway. That I'm going to have to find out where he's living on campus and go to him and take him by the hand and try to talk to him to just see what is going on with him. But imagine in a nation like the States, and I've read something since I've been here. It's talking about the Church of England. And the Church of England and a lot of the leadership in there are saying that by 2020, this is going to be an absolute minority religion in England. So it's a global phenomenon. And there's something missing, that we're losing our young people. We're losing our kids. And so I submit, just as my sister said at the very beginning, Islam, under the leadership of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, started as a movement for justice. It started as a movement not just trying to tell people, don't do this, you shouldn't take people's property and all like that, but based on Tawheed and inviting people to be a part of this organized system of the worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Justice was that element that came through in the beginning, and as the sister said, it has continued to this day. So I want to thank you for listening to me ramble for so long. Again, I apologize for our lateness. If it's anything that I've said that's against the book of Allah, the sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, I ask Allah and yours for forgiveness. Anything I've said that contains just an iota of truth, it comes from Allah, and only the mistakes have been mine. Assalamu alaikum.